And you might be thinking, well, open strings are super easy, so what's the problem? Well, actually, these open strings are used strategically in this etude. And that's because it's primarily going to be used in third position, or preceding a shift. The immediate difficulty that this provides for my left hand is that it means that I can no longer use How can we get better at the violin? By practicing Wohlfahrt's etude number 33 from his book number 2. Well, like always, let's first figure out what the primary focus of this etude is. Hello to my nearly 2,000 fellow instrumentalists who already subscribe to the channel, and hi to the rest of you who don't. I'm Jacques Gadway, and this is Gadway Violin. In today's video, we're doing another episode of Why Practice Etudes. Like always, our purpose is to look at a specific etude, determine what its primary focus is, and then to practice it and learn how we can get better from using the etude. In this video, we're continuing along our studies of Wohlfahrdt's book number 2. So we're on the third etude of this book, etude number 33. This etude is one of the more melodic etudes in this book, and resembles more closely what a piece of repertoire might look like. And as a result, it actually touches on quite a few techniques as you play through it. However, I still think we can determine a primary focus of the etude. Like the etude preceding it, etude number 32, there definitely is quite a bit of focus on tone production and bow distribution. If we look at the etude, it's comprised of a bunch of unequal bow lengths. We have quarter notes, dotted half notes, eighth notes, slurs here and there, offset. It will all certainly lead to some complicated bow distribution. However, if we've used the previous etude already and focused on such a concept, we can expand our focus on this one to do what's more unique to it. If we look throughout the etude closely, we can see that the composer uses a lot of open strings. And you might be thinking, well, open strings are super easy, so what's the problem? Well, actually, these open strings are used strategically in this etude. And that's because it's primarily going to be used in third position, or preceding a shift. The immediate difficulty that this provides for my left hand is that it means that I can no longer use my fingertips to create frames of reference for my position. It means that instead, I have to create a true hand frame that does not rely on fingertip placement in order to understand my position fully. Typically, we think of positions as being related to where our first finger is placed. If you simply think about it, first position is when our first finger is placed where it normally goes, on the first place. Second position is when our first finger goes where the second finger would normally go. Third position is where the third finger, and so forth. Eventually we run out of fingers, but it's still where the imaginary finger would go, or that imaginary note. Fifth position would be where that fifth note would naturally fall. But in truth, this isn't how positions work. We don't think of positions necessarily in terms of where the first finger goes, but rather where the hand goes. So it's super important to understand hand position as a separate concept from finger placement. The way that we understand this and the way that we're going to use this in this etude is through the use of the very important phrase double contact. This is a term that I say a lot on this channel because it's so extremely important. I didn't invent it. It was actually coined by a very famous violin pedagogue, Ivan Galamian. You've probably already heard me say it before, but I'll just quickly describe what double contact is in case we have any new viewers here. Double contact describes that we hold the neck of our violin with always 2 points of contact. Those 2 points in the first 3 positions, which we're only going to be using in this etude, are our thumb and the inside of our index finger. It's important to understand that when you're thinking about your hand position, that you understand exactly how those 2 points of contact are related. Between first and third position for me, they're always going to have the same relationship. The thumb is always going to be slightly ahead relative to that inner index finger. One other way that I like to think of it is that when I'm in a position, that thumb should be exactly where that first finger would naturally want to go. So that first finger wouldn't go above it or behind it, but right across from it. So another way we can think about positions if we use this logic is that rather than thinking about where the first finger lands as defining the position, we could define the position by thinking about where that double contact lands, or more specifically, where the thumb lands. If your double contact is set up like mine, where the thumb should be across from where the first finger naturally wants to go, then we can establish a position by having that thumb be right where that position is. So let's give an example. Let's find third position on the A string. For me, when I think of third position on the A string, I'm going to think about that thumb as being right across from where the D natural on the A string would want to be, meaning where that first finger is going to land. The thumb should be right across from the third finger, not behind and not in front. The reason that this distinction is important is because sometimes we actually are going to use an open string in a position. And if we're depending on the first finger's placement to understand position, then we're already lost. But if we understand our position as being defined by where our double contact is, then we can lift all of our fingers and place them back and know that we're going to have a good frame of reference using that thumb. Another reason why this is useful is because sometimes when you're playing a scale in a specific position, your first finger won't always land on the exact same spot on every string. If we take the key of D major, for example, and we wanted to play all of the notes in D major in third position, we would see that our first finger on the G string would not be on a C, it would be on a C sharp, which is actually going to be a half step higher than the position would suggest. If we think about position related to the first finger instead of double contact, this would mean that we would have to essentially shift in order to play that C sharp. But that seems like a lot of work. Rather, we can maintain the same third position regardless of what string we're on, and simply think of the first finger as being sharp relative to that position. When I play that C sharp, we can see that it's actually beyond the thumb. With all of that understood, let's take a look now at etude number 33 and take these concepts to heart. Let's start from the beginning. So right away we start with an open string and we land on a first finger in third position. Once again, if we define that position with our double contact, we can feel that frame of reference and just simply place our first finger directly across from that thumb. And that gives us a very confident understanding of our placement and therefore, most likely, good intonation. All of that is just in third position, and it all follows the same idea. We're creating frames of reference versus our hand frame and hand position, rather than necessarily depending on our fingertips. Moving on. In that measure, we have, again, this great reinforcement of the idea that we need to understand our finger placements relative to our hand frame rather than relative to each finger. After every single one of these notes, we have an open string, which means that we have to completely abandon the fingerboard with our fingers, which means that when we return to them, we have to use another frame of reference in order to be accurate. One of the important things that we should be practicing in this measure is the idea that when we lift the fingers, we want to lift them directly above the string. We don't want to lift them away. Something I see a lot with beginners and intermediate players, and even some advanced, is that when they lift their fingers, they lift them into the hand and away from the violin. This you can get away with for a very long time without it really affecting your playing. And that's actually part of the reason why it's such a prevalent issue in violin players. But the truth is, if you want to advance, and you especially want to increase your intonation consistency and your agility, we want to be extremely ergonomic with our finger lifting and placements. This means we have to get into the habit of lifting our fingers and maintaining their placement. So in this measure, we have a great opportunity to practice this idea. When we lift that first finger, we want to lift it right above. And when we place that second finger, it should already be right above. So we don't only think of our whole step and half step spacings on the fingerboard. We actually also think about it above the fingerboard. If you can get your fingers to find those spacings or prepare those spacings above the string, you're going to find a huge increase in your agility in violin playing. Let's move on. Once again, we have this open string, removing our fingers from the fingerboard, but retaining our hand frame and hand position to allow for a good intonation. Something that will consistently test our hand frame is the use of fourth fingers, which we see a lot of right here in this pattern. Especially when we're using octaves directly and or when we're using fourth fingers related to first fingers, we're really reinforcing what the shape of that position should look like. This etude is absolutely excellent for reinforcing hand frame and hand position. Moving on, for the first time we see a suggestion to not play an open string where we have this D. It doesn't really change much at all, it just changes the focus slightly from removing that first finger above the string to now instead keeping it down and finding that second finger relationship. In this section with the dotted halves here, that's just a great opportunity to practice our vibrato and our bow distribution. Once again, this particular etude is a lot more melodic and a lot closer to the way repertoire is written, so there's going to be a lot of supplemental focuses. One of them is certainly going to be our vibrato and our phrasing. Following that legato beautiful section, we have this quick eighth note passage where we're alternating between fingered notes and open strings. Once again, we're being tested here on our hand position and our frame of reference. Furthermore, in this entire segment, we don't use our first finger until the very end. This further reinforces the idea that we need to go beyond understanding positions as where the first finger is, but rather thinking about positions as where the hand is. Another thing that's very important to think about when practicing this section is that in spite of the fact that we don't use the first finger at all until the very end, we still need to think about the balance in the hand. Generally, we want to think about the weight of our fingers on the fingerboard as being tiered towards the low fingers. So our first finger is generally the heaviest, our second finger is the second heaviest, the third finger is the third, and the fourth finger is the lightest. Even when we don't have our first finger down, we still want this shift of weight to feel apparent. In other words, we don't want to lean onto that fourth finger or that third finger, even when it's the only finger we're using. One way that we can feel this idea and conceptualize it is to make sure that we're not placing our fourth finger or third finger by moving our hand at all. So be very careful of this motion. If you notice that your hand moves down or your wrist crooks back while you're placing your fourth finger, you're most likely leaning onto it too much. Instead, you should be looking for an independent finger motion that brings the pinky down without moving or changing that hand angle. This is what I mean by keeping the balance back in the hand. Regardless of the fact that we're not using the first finger, we still have a slight tilt of the hand to the first finger, and we're allowing those fingers, the fourth, the third, and the second, to be placed with the weight still feeling back in the hand. The rest of the etude continues to reinforce all of these ideas we've talked about, so I encourage you on your own time to practice and take a look at this entire etude with these primary focuses in mind. If you tackle this etude and practice it so that it sounds really great, you'll get to the point where you're finding those positions relative to your hand placement rather than your first finger. If this is an issue that you've struggled with in the past, hopefully this etude does help you. If there's another issue that you've been struggling with, leave it down in the comments below. If there's an etude that you'd love me to take a look at, leave it there as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, happy practicing.